Oh, honey, of course. People like you always seem to have complications. That's the line that started it all. The condescending, poisoned phrase from a senior flight attendant that turned a routine flight into a nightmare. She thought she was untouchable, a queen in her metal tube in the sky. She thought she was putting a young black girl in her place. What she didn't know was that the girl's father, sitting just a few rows back, had the power to bring her entire world, and this entire airplane, to a screeching halt. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about what happens when a quiet, powerful man is pushed too far. And the karma? It's as real and as brutal as it gets. The recycled air of the Boeing 777 hummed with the placid, anonymous energy of travel. It was a symphony of quiet coughs, the rustle of snack bags, and the soft clicks of seatbelts. For 15-year-old Maya Washington, it was the sound of freedom. She and her father, Robert, were on their way from Atlanta to a specialized summer program for gifted young artists in San Francisco. A trip she had earned, dreamed of, and meticulously planned for. Maya was a whirlwind of controlled energy, her sketchbook already open on the tray table, a fine-tipped pen dancing across the page. She had a cascade of intricate braids that fell over her shoulders, each one adorned with a single, small silver bead that would occasionally catch the light. Beside her, Robert Washington was the calm eye of her creative storm. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, he exuded a quiet confidence that was often mistaken for aloofness. He was reading a dense technical manual, the kind with complex diagrams and acronyms that would make most people's eyes glaze over, but he absorbed it with a placid focus. The love between them was a tangible, unspoken thing. A shared smile over the top of a book, a gentle nudge of the elbow. The first sign of turbulence had nothing to do with the weather. It came in the form of Brenda Jenkins, a senior flight attendant with hair sprayed into a helmet of improbable blonde and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She moved down the aisle with an air of practiced, weary authority, her movements sharp and efficient. She had been with Global Air Transit for 22 years, and in her mind, the airplane was her kingdom, the passengers her temporary, often annoying subjects. She'd already corrected a man for having his carry-on peeking an inch out from under the seat, snapped at a young mother whose toddler was crying, and now her gaze fell upon Maya. Maya was in the process of retrieving a small, insulated pouch from her backpack. It was a soft navy blue case, no bigger than a paperback book, with a medical alert symbol discreetly printed on the side. "Ma'am, your bag needs to be completely under the seat in front of you for takeoff," Brenda said, her voice a clipped, saccharine monotone. Maya looked up, her smile genuine and warm. "Oh, yes, of course. I just need to get my medicine out. The rest of the bag is already stowed." Brenda's eyes narrowed, her gaze flicking from Maya's braids to the medical pouch in her hand. "What medicine?" "It's my insulin," Maya explained patiently. "I have type 1 diabetes. I just need to make sure this pouch stays with me. It's temperature sensitive." She held it up slightly as if for inspection. "It's fine to be at room temperature for the flight. It just can't go in the cargo hold or get too hot if the plane sits on the tarmac." This was where the first crack in the placid surface of the flight appeared. Brenda's professionally pleasant mask tightened into something that bordered on a sneer. She looked down her nose at the young girl, a flicker of something ugly and old in her eyes. "Oh, honey, of course," Brenda said, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that was sharper than any insult. "People like you always seem to have complications." The comment hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The phrase "people like you" was a loaded weapon, and she had just fired it point blank. Maya recoiled as if physically struck. The warmth drained from her face. She was used to explaining her condition, but she wasn't used to this. This felt different, personal. "I'm sorry?" Maya asked, her voice small. A man in the row across from them, a weary-looking salesman in a wrinkled suit, looked up from his laptop, a frown creasing his brow. Brenda ignored him and focused on Maya, her power trip now fully engaged. "Liquids and gels. We have rules for a reason. You can't just have unverified medical supplies in the cabin." "It's not unverified," Maya insisted, her voice gaining a bit of its strength back. "I have a doctor's note right here." She reached for her backpack again, But Brenda held up a hand, a gesture that was both dismissive and commanding. I don't have time to read notes. The captain wants the cabin secured. Everything needs to be stowed. The pouch goes in the bag goes under the seat. End of story. But I need it with me, Maya pleaded, a note of desperation creeping into her tone. Her blood sugar could be unpredictable, especially with the stress of travel. Having her emergency insulin and glucose monitor within arm's reach wasn't a preference. It was a non-negotiable lifeline. My pump can sometimes fail. If I go into hypoglycemic shock, I need this immediately. It's a safety issue. Brenda let out an exaggerated sigh, a performance for the other passengers. She was the beleaguered professional, dealing with a difficult, non-compliant passenger. Young lady, I am in charge of safety on this aircraft, and your little bag of potions is not part of the safety protocol. Now stow it, or I will confiscate it. The word potions was another jab, designed to belittle and infantilize. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she clutched the pouch. You can't do that. It's my medicine. It's against the law. The Air Carrier Access Act. Brenda actually laughed, a short, sharp bark that turned heads. Oh, you've been reading, have you? That's cute. Let me tell you how it really works. On this plane, my word is the law. You're creating a disturbance. At that moment, Robert Washington returned from the forward lavatory. He saw the tension immediately, his daughter's pale, distressed face, and the flight attendant looming over her like a vulture. Is there a problem here? Robert asked, his voice even and low, yet it cut through the air with an undeniable authority. Brenda turned, momentarily taken aback by his size and the sheer force of his calm presence. She quickly recovered, putting her customer service smile back on, though it was strained. Sir, I was just explaining our safety protocols to your daughter. She's refusing to properly stow her carry-on. She was taking out her medical pouch, Robert stated, not asked. He looked at Maya, who gave him a small, desperate nod. Which contains liquids that need to be stowed for takeoff. Brenda snapped back, her patience clearly gone. It contains insulin, Robert said, his voice dropping a degree in temperature. And under federal law, in this airline's own policy, which I'm sure you're familiar with, she is permitted to keep it with her at her seat. Brenda's face flushed a blotchy red. Being corrected was one thing. Being corrected with such certainty by a passenger was an affront to her entire sense of self. This was her domain. She would not be challenged. Sir, I am the senior flight attendant on this aircraft. I know the policies, and I will not have my authority questioned. The item is a security risk until we are in the air. Now either she gives it to me, or you will both be removed from this flight for noncompliance. It was the nuclear option, the ultimate threat. Most passengers would fold immediately, intimidated into silence. Maya looked at her father, her eyes wide with fear and indignation. Robert looked at Brenda, his expression unreadable, a mask of unnerving calm. He knew they were in the right, but he also knew a person like Brenda, drunk on a thimbleful of power, was unpredictable. He made a calculated decision. Arguing further would only lead to them being dragged off the plane, causing a scene and ruining Maya's trip. The best course of action was to comply for now and address it with the purser or through official channels later. Fine, Robert said, his voice tight. Maya, put the pouch in your backpack. We'll deal with this after takeoff. Maya looked betrayed for a second before seeing the resolve in her father's eyes. She reluctantly slid the navy blue pouch back into the front pocket of her backpack and pushed it deep under the seat in front of her. Brenda watched, a smug, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She had won. She had put these people in their place. Thank you for your cooperation, she said, the words dripping with insincere politeness. She then turned and continued down the aisle, her victory sealed. But it wasn't. For Brenda, it wasn't enough to win. She needed to dominate. As the plane finished boarding and the cabin doors were sealed, a call came from the cockpit to prepare for pushback. The flight attendants did their final security sweep. As Brenda passed by Maya and Robert's row, she paused. With a swift, deliberate motion, she bent down, her back to Robert, who was now engrossed in the safety card. I believe I said this needed to be confiscated, she whispered, her voice a venomous hiss meant only for Maya. Before Maya could react, Brenda's hand darted out. She unzipped the front pocket of Maya's backpack, snatched the navy blue medical pouch, and stood up, clutching it in her hand. Maya gasped. "What are you doing? My dad said—" "Your dad isn't in charge here. I am." Brenda cut her off, her eyes gleaming with malice. She turned and walked swiftly toward the forward galley, the pouch in her hand. Maya was frozen in shock. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. Robert looked up, his eyes following Maya's terrified gaze toward the galley. "What did she do?" "She took it," Maya stammered, tears welling in her eyes. "She took my medicine." Robert's face, a mask of calm moments before, hardened into something primal and dangerous. The quiet father was gone. He unbuckled his seatbelt with a sharp metallic click that echoed in the suddenly silent row. He stood up, a towering figure of controlled fury. He walked toward the galley, his movements precise and deliberate. He found Brenda standing near the galley trash compartment, a look of pure, spiteful satisfaction on her face. In her hand, she held the pouch over the open flap. "Give that back to me, now!" Robert commanded, his voice a low growl. Brenda looked at him, unafraid, even emboldened by the confrontation. "You need to return to your seat and fasten your seatbelt, sir. We are about to push back from the gate." "Give me my daughter's medicine," Robert repeated, each word laced with ice. For a final, theatrical flourish of dominance, Brenda held his gaze, a cruel smile spreading across her face. And then, with a deliberate, almost slow-motion flick of her wrist, she dropped the navy blue pouch into the trash compactor. She closed the hatch, turned a key, and pushed a button. A loud, grinding whir filled the small space for a few seconds. She turned back to Robert, her expression one of utter victory. "It's disposed of. Company policy regarding unverified liquids. Now, if you don't return to your seat, I'll have the captain call security." She had miscalculated. She thought she was dealing with just another angry passenger. She had no idea who Robert Washington was. She had no idea that with that single, malicious act, she hadn't just thrown away a teenager's medicine. She had just grounded the entire flight. The grinding sound of the trash compactor ceased, leaving a ringing silence in the galley. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down. Robert Washington stood motionless, his 6'3" frame filling the narrow space. His face was a granite mask, but his eyes were blazing with a cold, white-hot fury that was far more terrifying than any shout. He didn't look at Brenda. His gaze was fixed on the stainless steel door of the compactor, behind which his daughter's lifeline had just been destroyed. Brenda, emboldened by his silence, mistook it for submission. "Now, if you'll please return to your seat, sir," she said, the honorific dripping with mockery. "You're holding up the flight." Another flight attendant, a younger man named Kevin with a nervous energy, appeared at the galley entrance. "Brenda, what's going on? The captain is asking why we're not cleared for pushback. We have a passenger who is refusing to follow crew instructions," Brenda announced loudly, playing to her junior colleague and anyone within earshot. "He's being disruptive." Robert finally moved. He didn't turn to leave. He slowly, deliberately turned his head and met Brenda's gaze. The sheer, unadulterated calm in his eyes made the hair on her arm stand up. "Open it," he said. His voice was unnaturally quiet, yet it carried an absolute command. Brenda scoffed. "I will not. It's a sealed waste unit. Now, for the last time—" "Open the compactor and retrieve my daughter's medication," Robert interrupted, his voice still low, but now with a razor's edge. "You have committed a felony under the Air Carrier Access Act. You have willfully destroyed a passenger's essential medical property, and you have endangered the life of a minor." He recited the facts with the detached precision of a lawyer reading an indictment. Kevin, the junior flight attendant, looked back and forth between them, his face pale. He could sense this was spiraling far beyond a simple passenger dispute. He saw Maya back in her seat, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "Brenda, maybe we should just call the purser," Kevin suggested nervously. "I am the senior attendant. I don't need the purser," Brenda snapped, her authority now brittle. "Sir, I will have you arrested if you do not sit down right now." Robert ignored her completely. He looked past her to Kevin. "What is the captain's name?" Kevin stammered. It's Captain Miller, Stephen Miller." "Thank you, Kevin," Robert said, his tone softening for a fraction of a second. He then looked back at Brenda. You have 10 seconds to inform Captain Miller that you have a critical passenger medical situation and that you have destroyed the passenger's insulin. If you don't, I will. This was the final straw for Brenda. Her entire career was built on the premise that she held absolute authority in the cabin. This man's refusal to be intimidated, his calm recitation of regulations, his galling audacity to demand she contact the captain, it was an insurrection. That's it, she seethed. You're done. She picked up the interphone, her hand trembling with rage. Captain Miller, this is Brenda in the forward galley. I have an unruly passenger, a Mr. What's your name? She glared at Robert. Robert didn't answer her. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. For a fleeting second, Brenda felt a jolt of fear. But he didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a simple black leather wallet. He flipped it open, not to show money or a credit card, but to a laminated ID card nestled behind a clear plastic window. He held it up for her to see. It was a Global Air Transit corporate ID. It had his photo, his name, Robert Washington, and his title. The title was what made Brenda's blood run cold. It wasn't sales executive or marketing director. The words printed in bold official font were Senior Czech Airman, Boeing 727 Fleet. The world tilted on its axis. A Czech airman, not just a pilot, not just a captain. A Czech airman was a pilot's pilot. They were the elite aviators designated by the airline and the FAA to evaluate, train, and certify every single pilot on a specific aircraft fleet. They were the ultimate authority in the sky. Their word on safety, procedure, and crew competency was gospel. They could ground a plane, fail a captain on a check ride, and their reports could make or break careers. Robert Washington didn't just fly the 777. He was one of the people who decided who was fit to fly it. Brenda stared at the ID, her mind refusing to process the information. The smug, triumphant mask on her face dissolved, replaced by a slack-jawed horror. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her blotchy makeup standing out in stark relief. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Kevin, peering over her shoulder, saw the ID and physically took a step back as if he'd touched a live wire. "Oh my God," he breathed. Robert's voice, when he spoke again, was no longer that of an angry father. It was the voice of command, the voice he used in a flight simulator when a pilot was making a critical error. "Brenda Jenkins," he said, his tone flat and lethal. "You have wantonly destroyed critical medical supplies belonging to a passenger with a disability. You have lied about company policy. You have demonstrated a complete and catastrophic lack of judgment. You have threatened and emotionally distressed a minor, and you have done it all under the color of your authority as a flight attendant for my airline." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You are a liability. Your entire crew, by allowing this to happen, is a liability." He reached past the frozen Brenda and picked up the interphone handset himself. Her hand fell away from it as if it were red hot. "Captain Miller, this is Czech Airman Robert Washington," he said, his voice calm and clear. "Are you on this frequency?" There was a moment of static, then a surprised voice from the cockpit. Yes, Robert, it's Steve. What are you doing on my flight? Is everything all right?" The captain's tone was one of shock and immediate deference. He knew exactly who Robert Washington was. "No, Steve, everything is not all right," Robert replied, his gaze still locked on Brenda's terrified face. "I am invoking my authority as a Czech airman. I am formally declaring your cabin crew unfit for duty due to a gross safety violation and misconduct. One of your senior flight attendants has just deliberately destroyed the insulin of a 15-year-old type 1 diabetic passenger. We are not safe to fly. I want this aircraft returned to the gate immediately." Silence. The entire galley was frozen. The only sound was the faint hum of the auxiliary power unit. From the cockpit, there was a stunned pause. "Say again, Robert." Captain Miller's voice was tight with disbelief. "She destroyed insulin?" "That is correct, Steve. In the galley trash compactor. We need to go back to the gate, now." There was no arguing. There was no discussion. A Czech airman had made a formal declaration of an unsafe condition. To ignore it would be career suicide for Captain Miller. Copy that, Robert, Miller's voice came back. Now all business. Returning to the gate. A moment later, the gentle lurch of the pushback tractor stopped. Then the engines, which had just begun to spool up with their signature whine, spooled back down into silence. The plane began to move, but not forward toward the runway. It was being towed slowly back toward the terminal. The captain's voice came over the PA system, a stark contrast to the usual cheerful welcome. Folks, this is Captain Miller from the flight deck. Apologies for the delay, but we have to return to the gate due to an unforeseen issue with the cabin crew. We will provide you with more information as soon as we have it. A collective groan went through the cabin. Passengers looked around, confused and annoyed. What could be so wrong with the crew that they had to turn back? In the galley, Brenda Jenkins finally found her voice. It was a pathetic, whimpering sound. It was a mistake. I didn't know. I thought it was a liquid. Robert turned his back on her, a gesture of complete and utter dismissal. He looked at Kevin, whose face was ashen. Kevin, go to my daughter in seat 24A. Sit with her. Tell her I'm handling it and that she's going to be okay. Kevin nodded dumbly and scurried away, grateful to be out of the blast radius. Robert keyed the interphone again. Steve, when we dock, I want the gate agent, the ground operations supervisor, and an airline security representative to meet the aircraft. Nobody deplanes, and have them send a paramedic to the gate as a precaution. Already on it, Robert, Captain Miller replied. The respect and urgency in his voice were unmistakable. The full weight of what she had done finally crashed down on Brenda Jenkins. Her smug authority had vanished, incinerated by the revelation of who she had chosen to cross. She wasn't just in trouble with a passenger. She had assaulted the child of one of the most powerful pilots in the entire company, in his presence, on his airline. She wasn't just going to be written up. Her career, the sole source of her identity and power for 22 years, was over. She leaned against the galley counter, her legs suddenly unable to support her, her carefully constructed world crumbling into dust around her. And the plane wasn't even at the gate yet. The karma was just getting started. The short journey back to the jet bridge was the longest of Brenda Jenkins's life. The gentle bump as the aircraft docked was like the sound of a guillotine sliding into place. Through the small galley window, she could see the ground crew scurrying and the flashing lights of an airport vehicle approaching. It wasn't the police, not yet. It was an airline operations SUV. The murmur in the passenger cabin grew louder, a mixture of frustration and intense curiosity. Phones were out, with passengers speculating in hushed tones, many of them having witnessed the initial confrontation. The man in the wrinkled suit who had frowned at Brenda's racist comment was now watching the galley entrance with keen interest. A young woman in the row behind Maya, a nurse named Sarah, had overheard Maya's explanation about her insulin and was looking on with professional concern. The moment the seatbelt sign pinged off, signaling they were docked, Robert Washington was in motion. He walked back to his row. Maya looked up at him, her face tear-stained but no longer terrified. Seeing her father take control had replaced her fear with a shaky sense of security. The young flight attendant, Kevin, was sitting awkwardly in the aisle seat next to her, having offered her a bottle of water and tissues. "It's okay, sweetie," Robert said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We're going to get this sorted out. We're getting new insulin." Before anyone else could move, the aircraft door was opened, not by the crew, but from the outside. 3 figures stepped into the cabin. The first was the gate agent, looking flustered. The second was a man in a high-visibility vest and a tie, his face etched with worry, David Chen, the ground operations supervisor. The third was a uniformed airline security officer. David Chen's eyes scanned the cabin and immediately found Robert Washington. There was a flicker of recognition and dawning horror on his face. He knew who Washington was. Every operations manager knew the names of the fleet's check airmen. "Captain Washington," Chen said, his voice tight. "Captain Miller informed us there was an incident." "There was, David," Robert replied, his voice calm but carrying across the front of the cabin. "I want to handle this right here, right now, before any passengers deplane. I need witnesses." He turned and pointed directly into the galley. "And I need the perpetrator." Brenda, who had been trying to shrink into the shadows of the galley, was forced to step out, her face a mask of waxy dread. "Ms. Jenkins," David Chen said, his tone dangerously professional. Captain Washington has made an extremely serious allegation. He stated that you deliberately destroyed a passenger's medical supplies. Brenda's survival instincts kicked in, overriding her fear with a desperate attempt at self-preservation. She began to lie. "It was a misunderstanding," she said, her voice high and strained. "The passenger had an unverified liquid, and she was being non-compliant. I was following TSA protocol. I didn't know it was insulin. She never told me." A gasp came from Maya's seat. "I did. I told you exactly what it was. I even offered you my doctor's note." "That's a lie," Brenda shot back, her voice growing hysterical. "She was belligerent. Her father was threatening me. I felt unsafe." Robert didn't even flinch. He simply looked at David Chen and said, "Check the passenger manifest for seat 24B, the gentleman across the aisle from my daughter." Chen spoke into his radio. A moment later, a voice crackled back. "Passenger in 24B is Martin Gilbert." Robert looked across the aisle. "Mr. Gilbert, my name is Robert Washington. You were present for the initial conversation. Could you please tell Mr. Chen what you heard?" The salesman, Martin Gilbert, took a deep breath. He was clearly a man who hated getting involved, but his conscience won out. He stood up, his gaze firm. "I heard everything. The girl Maya was calm and polite. She explained it was insulin for her diabetes. She said she needed to keep it with her. I heard her offer a doctor's note. Your flight attendant," he said, pointing a finger directly at Brenda, "was condescending and aggressive. I heard her say, and I quote, 'People like you always seem to have complications.' Then she threatened to confiscate the medicine." A wave of murmurs rippled through the cabin. The phrase "people like you" hung in the air again, now in front of management and security. Brenda's face went from pale to ghostly white. "Is there anyone else?" Robert asked, his voice steady. The young nurse Sarah, in the row behind Maya, stood up. "My name is Sarah Jenkins. No relation," she added quickly, glancing at Brenda. "I'm a registered nurse. I also heard the exchange. The passenger clearly identified the medication as insulin and explained the medical necessity of keeping it at her seat. The flight attendant's response was not only unprofessional, it was medically ignorant and dangerous. What she did could have caused a medical emergency at 35,000 feet. David Chen's face was grim. Two credible, unrelated witnesses had just corroborated the story and torpedoed Brenda's lies. He looked at Brenda, his expression now devoid of any sympathy. "Brenda, where is the medical pouch now?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Brenda trembled, unable to speak. She just pointed a shaky finger at the galley compactor. "Open it," Chen commanded. With fumbling hands, Brenda unlocked and opened the compactor door. The airline security officer stepped forward and, using a pair of gloves, reached into the bin of coffee grounds, discarded napkins, and other galley trash. He pulled out the navy blue pouch. It was soiled and slightly crushed, the zipper broken. He handed it to Chen. Chen held it up. The evidence was damning. He looked at Brenda with utter disgust. "Brenda Jenkins, you are hereby stood down from duty, effective immediately. Your flying privileges are suspended. Security will escort you to my office. You will surrender your company ID and badge. You are not to speak to any other crew members. Is that understood?" The words hit Brenda like physical blows. Stood down, suspended, escorted, surrender your ID. It was the ceremonial execution of her career. The authority she had wielded with such cruelty was stripped from her in front of the very passengers she had lorded it over just minutes before. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted around, looking for an ally, for any shred of hope, and found none. Kevin, the junior flight attendant, refused to meet her gaze. The purser, who had been silent throughout, looked at the floor. Captain Miller remained sequestered in the cockpit, his silence a condemnation in itself. The security officer gently but firmly took her arm. As he led her from the galley toward the jet bridge, a smattering of applause broke out in the cabin. One passenger shouted, "Good riddance!" Another held up their phone, openly recording her walk of shame. The humiliation was absolute, a public stripping of the pride she held so dear. Her carefully constructed helmet of blonde hair seemed to droop. Her crisp uniform suddenly looked like a costume. The queen had been deposed in her own castle. As she was led away, Robert turned his attention back to the primary issue. "David, My daughter's insulin and glucose meter have been compromised. They may have been damaged by the compactor, and they are certainly no longer sterile. I need a new sealed vial of Novolog insulin and a new one-touch variometer immediately. Of course, Captain Washington, Chen said, already speaking into his radio, relaying the specific prescription needs to a team on the ground. We have a contract with the airport's urgent care clinic. We'll have it delivered to the gate in 30 minutes. We are so sorry for this. This is unacceptable on every level. Yes, it is, Robert said, his gaze sweeping over the remaining crew. Which is why this flight isn't leaving. Not with this crew. I want a full replacement crew, from the flight attendants to the pilots. Chen's eyes widened. A full replacement crew would mean canceling the flight entirely. It would be a logistical and financial nightmare. Robert, Captain Washington, Captain Miller wasn't involved. Captain Miller is the pilot in command, Robert stated, his voice ringing with the authority of the federal aviation regulations. He is ultimately responsible for the conduct of his crew. This happened on his watch. His first officer and the rest of the cabin crew stood by and did nothing. They enabled her. Their judgment is compromised. My confidence in their ability to manage a cabin and ensure passenger safety is zero. I will be filing a formal report with the FAA, and I am telling you, as this airline's senior check airman for this fleet, that this crew is not flying today. Ground the flight, cancel it, rebook the passengers. I don't care what you have to do. But these people are not taking 150 souls into the air. It was the final nail in the coffin. There was no appeal. He had laid down the law, and the airline had no choice but to obey. David Chen paled, nodded, and picked up his radio to deliver the fatal news to airline operations. The flight was officially canceled. Karma had hit Brenda, and it had hit her hard. But for Robert Washington, this was no longer just about one racist, power-tripping flight attendant. It was about the system that allowed her to flourish, and he was far from finished. The announcement of Flight 724's cancellation was the spark that ignited a contained brushfire of passenger fury. The cabin, which had been simmering with curiosity, boiled over into a cacophony of frustrated groans, angry clicks of unbuckling seatbelts, and the frantic tapping of thumbs on phone screens as 100+ travel plans disintegrated in real time. A businessman in a crisp suit began shouting at a flight attendant about a missed multi-million-dollar merger meeting in San Francisco. A family wearing matching vacation t-shirts looked on the verge of tears, their dream trip to see the Golden Gate Bridge evaporating before their eyes. Yet as the passengers deplaned into the swirling chaos of the terminal, a new narrative began to cut through the anger. The story passed from row to row by Martin Gilbert, the nurse Sarah, and others who had witnessed the event, was spreading with the speed of gossip. It wasn't an abstract crew issue. It was a drama, vivid and righteous. They spoke of the calm, brave girl and her polite request, the sneering flight attendant and her cruel, racist taunt, the deliberate destruction of life-saving medicine, and the sudden, stunning intervention of the father who held the power to stop it all. The anger at the airline remained, but it was now alloyed with a potent mix of sympathy for Maya and a kind of awed respect for Robert. He hadn't just lost his temper. He had executed a precise surgical strike against injustice. While the other passengers were herded toward overburdened customer service desks, Robert and Maya were carefully insulated from the fallout. David Chen, the ground operations supervisor, personally escorted them away from the gate, his manner a frantic ballet of apology and deference. He led them not to the main terminal, but through a discreet, unmarked door and into the hushed, climate-controlled sanctuary of the Global Air Transit First-Class Lounge. The contrast was jarring. Outside was a sea of frustration. Inside was an oasis of leather armchairs, complimentary cappuccinos, and the gentle clinking of silverware on porcelain. It was the airline's first clumsy attempt to smother the fire with luxury. An attendant rushed forward with warm towels. Another offered a menu of gourmet snacks. Maya sank into a plush chair, the adrenaline of the past hour finally deserting her, leaving a profound emotional exhaustion in its wake. She was safe, she knew, but the humiliation felt like a stain, the memory of Brenda's sneering face and venomous words, "People like you," replaying in her mind. Robert declined the offer of food, his focus laser-sharp and unclouded by the opulent surroundings. He saw the lounge not as a comfort, but as a gilded cage, an attempt to manage and contain them. "My daughter needs her medication," Robert stated, his voice cutting through the lounge's placid atmosphere. He looked at David Chen, who was hovering nearby like a nervous ghost. "Not in an hour, not in 30 minutes. I want confirmation that it is on its way now." "Yes, Captain Washington, absolutely," Chen stammered, already speaking into his shoulder radio. "The courier from the airport clinic is en route. They have the specific insulin and a new monitoring kit. He's 5 minutes out." True to his word, a man from the clinic arrived shortly after, carrying a sealed, temperature-controlled bag. In the quiet corner of the lounge, under Robert's watchful eye, Maya carefully unpacked the new supplies. The simple clinical act of checking her blood sugar and preparing a new insulin pen seemed to ground her. A small ritual of control in the wake of a situation where all control had been stolen from her. Once Maya was settled, Robert turned his full attention back to a pale David Chen. "I need access to Brenda Jenkins's complete service record, her entire HR file. Every passenger complaint, every internal review, every commendation for the past 10 years. Chen physically flinched. "Robert, Captain Washington, you know I can't do that. That's a massive breach of employee privacy. It's confidential HR material. Legal would have my head." He attempted a collegial tone, a desperate appeal from one company man to another. "Come on, you know the procedure." Robert leaned forward, his large frame seeming to suck the air out of the space between them. His voice was low, devoid of heat, but terrifying in its intensity. "David, don't you dare appeal to procedure right now. Your procedure is what allowed that woman to flourish in this company for over 20 years. Your procedure is what led to her racially profiling and endangering my daughter. Today, I am not your colleague. I am not Captain Washington, the check airman. I am the father of the child your airline almost put in a coma. So let me be clear. You are facing a lawsuit that will make headlines for a year. You are facing an FAA investigation that I will personally oversee. Confidentiality ended the moment Brenda Jenkins threw that pouch in the trash. Get me the file." Defeated, Chen nodded numbly. He knew a command from a check airman about a safety issue was one thing. A command from that same man in this context was an unstoppable force. He made the call. An hour later, a grim-faced vice president of human resources, a woman named Catherine Shaw, arrived. She didn't offer apologies. She offered a thick, sealed manila envelope, which she placed on the table as if it were a bomb. Inside was Brenda's career. As Robert and Maya sat together and sifted through the heavily redacted pages, a sickeningly clear pattern emerged. It was worse than Robert had imagined. There were 12 major passenger complaints in 8 years, a litany of arrogance and abuse. But the most damning were 4 separate complaints from black passengers. A businessman from Chicago, a college student from New Orleans, a young mother traveling with her baby. Each story was hauntingly similar. They described feeling targeted, spoken to with a condescending tone, and subjected to arbitrary enforcement of rules that didn't seem to apply to white passengers around them. In each case, the purser, George, had co-signed Brenda's report, backing her version of events. And in each case, the airline's internal review had concluded with the same sterile, dismissive phrase, "No finding of misconduct. Employee acted in accordance with company policy." Maya read one of the complaints over her father's shoulder, her eyes welling with tears. "She's done this before," she whispered, her voice thick with a mixture of sorrow and anger. They knew what she was like, and they let her keep doing it. It was a pivotal moment for her. The personal insult she had suffered was transformed into a piece of a larger, uglier puzzle. Her humiliation was no longer just her own. It belonged to all the others who had been silenced. Meanwhile, the digital world had passed its verdict. The passenger's video of Brenda's horrified face and her subsequent walk of shame had gone supernova. It was on Twitter, TikTok, and every major news outlet's website. The headlines were brutal. "Power trip at 30,000 feet. Airline queen dethroned. Flight attendant's racist rant grounds flight." And the most popular, "Father from hell for flight attendant from hell." The court of public opinion had delivered a unanimous conviction. Global Air Transit's response was swift and ruthless. Brenda Jenkins was fired via a cold 5-minute video call with HR and a lawyer. Her termination was for cause, citing gross misconduct and endangerment of a passenger, a classification that vaporized her pension and benefits. The purser, George, for his role as a long-term enabler, was demoted, stripped of his senior title, and reassigned to short-haul domestic routes. His career effectively neutered. Captain Miller and his first officer were formally reprimanded and scheduled for a mandatory, month-long grounding for leadership retraining. The next day, Robert and Maya were summoned to the top floor of Global Air Transit's corporate headquarters. They were ushered into a sprawling boardroom with panoramic views of the Atlanta skyline. A team of executives and lawyers, led by the airline's CEO, Marcus Thorne, were waiting. The air was thick with tension and the smell of expensive coffee. Thorne, a man with a politician's smile and a shark's eyes, began with a deeply polished apology. He spoke of accountability and deep regret. Then came the offer. To remedy the situation and acknowledge the distress caused, the airline was prepared to offer a settlement, a check for $2 million, a gag order, and the matter would be considered closed. He slid the offer across the polished mahogany table. Robert didn't even look at it. He pushed it back. "We don't want your money," Robert said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room. Thorne's smile faltered. "I'm sorry?" It was Maya who spoke next, her voice quiet but ringing with a newfound strength forged from her ordeal. "A check won't stop this from happening again. That woman, she didn't see me. She saw a stereotype. She saw a problem. The money won't teach your employees how to see people." Robert nodded, picking up where she left off. "We want change. Real, systemic change." He laid out their terms: the public apology and the creation of a new mandatory training program. He detailed how it would be developed with patient advocacy groups and civil rights organizations. He concluded with the final, non-negotiable term. "It will be called the Maya Initiative," he declared. "Her name will be on it. Her story will be the first thing every new and current employee learns. They will know that a system that protects bullies over passengers will be dismantled. They will learn that compassion is a part of the safety briefing." The lawyers shifted uncomfortably. The CEO stared, for the first time looking genuinely cornered. This was a PR nightmare they couldn't buy their way out of. Faced with the combined threat of a landmark lawsuit, an FAA investigation spearheaded by their own elite pilot, and the moral authority of the very girl they had wronged, they folded. Every demand was met. For Brenda Jenkins, the fall was as swift as it was brutal. Her lawsuit for wrongful termination was unceremoniously dismissed by a judge who called her actions a shocking and indefensible abuse of authority. Blacklisted by every commercial carrier, she found herself unemployable in the only industry she knew. The smug superiority that had been her armor for 2 decades now offered no protection from the cold reality of unemployment and mounting bills. 6 months crept by, each day a new lesson in humility. She lost her condo. Her friends from the airline stopped returning her calls. The crisp uniform was replaced by worn-out jeans. Her world had shrunk to the size of a tiny rented room. Finally, out of desperation, she took a job with a third-party commercial cleaning company. The work was grueling, anonymous, and at night. One cold, wet Tuesday, her supervisor assigned her crew to a new corporate contract, a massive, sprawling campus on the edge of the airport. As Brenda pushed her cart of cleaning supplies through a set of glass doors, her heart stopped. The logo on the wall was the familiar blue and silver globe of Global Air Transit. She was assigned to the Flight Operations and Training Center. Her nights became a surreal torment. She emptied trash cans in the very briefing rooms where pilots discussed flight plans. She scrubbed toilets used by the smiling young recruits who were replacing her. She vacuumed the carpets outside the executive offices where the decision to fire her had been made. Each squeak of her mop, each hum of the floor buffer, was a mocking echo of her former life. One evening, during her lonely 3 a.m. break in a deserted cafeteria, a local news program was playing silently on an overhead TV. A human interest story began. The camera focused on a poised, articulate young woman standing in a bustling art gallery. It was Maya Washington. She was being interviewed as the winner of a prestigious statewide art scholarship. Her winning piece, a powerful charcoal drawing titled Vile, hung behind her. It depicted a girl with intricate braids cradled by the dark curved window of an airplane, her face illuminated by the single glowing blue vial she held in her hands. The reporter praised her artistic talent, then mentioned her growing work as a national youth ambassador for the American Diabetes Association, an advocacy role she took on, the reporter noted, after a harrowing incident on a flight earlier this year inspired her to fight for the rights of passengers with medical needs. Brenda sat frozen on the hard plastic chair, a half-eaten sandwich in her hand. She stared at the screen, at the image of this radiant, powerful young woman who was turning the trauma Brenda had inflicted on her into a force for good. She looked at her own faint reflection in the dark screen. A tired woman in a stained, gray uniform, her hair limp, her face a roadmap of bitterness. The queen of the cabin was now a ghost haunting the halls of her fallen kingdom. She had tried to extinguish a small light, and in doing so, had only managed to plunge herself into a permanent, unyielding darkness, forced to polish the floors of a world that was now celebrating the very person she had tried to erase. In the end, it wasn't just about one flight. It was about a fundamental abuse of power and the quiet, unshakable strength it takes to stand against it. Brenda Jenkins learned the hard way that the authority you wield is only as strong as the respect you show. By trying to crush a young girl's spirit, she inadvertently launched her into advocacy and cemented a legacy of positive change, all while her own legacy became one of disgrace. This story is a powerful reminder that prejudice and pride often lead to a fall, and sometimes karma doesn't just knock on the door, it grounds the entire flight to make sure you answer. What did you think of this incredible story of justice? Have you ever witnessed an abuse of power like this? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more true stories of karma and justice. Thanks for watching.